terms in it. So share the screen. So this was an article in the Globe and Mail, and it was about the economic outlook. So I'll just present that. And sort of when we're going to end up getting out of the economic difficulty, which, we don't really know the answer because nobody can think of when this happened. Previously, in 2008, 2009, a bunch of banks were in trouble. Some people lost their homes, but it wasn't like everyone had to stay at home for months at a time. So this was one that was called, I posted it in the, I posted the full article in our Google Classroom under today's post, but basically it was called The Nebulous Outlook for Inflation as the Economy Reopens. It was in the Globe and by David Parkinson. And one of the things he was talking about, it's near impossible for the Bank of Canada, that's the national bank, to say whether or not the aftershock will be inflationary or deflationary. So I wanted to maybe just go over those words, because we're trying to figure out, well, firstly, how much economic activity will there be? Will it be the same as before, slightly less, slightly more, a lot less? But then also, what are the price of goods going to be? So if the goods are going up, that would be inflation. That they're slightly increasing year by year, or if they go down by a lot, that would be deflationary. And usually what the Bank of Canada does is they want to have about 2% inflation each year, which is predictable. It's not too extreme, and it's better to have that kind of inflation because people are moving to Canada, people are getting hired, the population's growing, we're consuming more things. So odds are demand is going up for those reasons. So you can't just say, oh, we don't want any inflation at all. But the idea is, to have it be something that's predictable so people know what their budget's going to be a few months down the line. So here's Canada's inflation over recent years. And so it's been about 2% a year, not exactly, because there's been some times, where it months have been less than what was expected for whatever reason. Some months where it would be more because people were out, spending more money. But overall, it's been about 2%, a year if you're looking at the right-hand axis for the last few years. So, but they're not really sure, what's going to happen. So the author said, it's a pretty big problem that the central bank doesn't know what's going to happen after they spend a quarter century trying to keep it around that 2% inflation window. Let's see if there's anyone else needing to get into the room. So whenever the bank puts money into the economy, again, that's monetary policy. Like you might hear that they adjust the interest rates, or that they buy debt, or that they print more money. But so anything the Bank of Canada does would be our monetary policy. And it's sort of talking about how this is a big example in real supply and demand. We covered that back in October. And how much are people going to supply a good, and how much that's supply, at a certain price, some people would step forward and make the good. As the price expanded, more and more people would agree to make it. So supply is always positively sloped, but demand is usually the other way. The cheaper the item, the more people want of it. As it gets more expensive, the less people are willing to pay, the less people want it. They'll substitute something else. So I think what you've noticed is supply, both have been shut off. Supply, which is restaurants or contractors or manufacturers, restaurants aren't open. they're not supplying food to people. The factories that have had to close because they're not essential, or they might have had a COVID-19 outbreak, they've closed. They're not producing their goods. Uh, so there's less supply right now. And also the people who want things, which is us as consumers, demanders, um, they there's been a lot less demand, right? You're not going out to buy things. Your parents aren't using the car as much. So we're not going to restaurants. So what you'd actually see is probably our economy right now has gone from this initial equilibrium with aggregate supply and aggregate demand meeting to, a lot less supply, a lot less demand, there's less output, and we're not exactly sure whether prices have gone up or prices have gone down yet. We're still trying to process it. But right now, the economy's taken a big step backwards towards the left because both the supply and demand have decreased. So um, a quote again from the article. So the annual rate plunged plunged to 0.9%. So instead of it being the 2% annual target, it was 0.9% annually. And some economists think we'll dip into negative territory. The biggest reason in Canada, the energy market is so important. It's a big part of the calculation when they make inflation. So you might have noticed or seen how cheap gas and oil is, and that's one of the reasons that it has gone down so much. And demand, if people are working at home, they're just not demanding gasoline as much. um, there's no jet fuel that's being demanded, so that price has totally gone down, and that's a big reason that inflation has gone down. Here would be a price of gas in Toronto, and that's really, really cheap. So one sometimes one possibility of what could happen, you might hear Trump and Steve Mnuchin say this is, oh, there's going to be this big bang once the economy is reopened. Everyone who's wanted to buy something for the last, uh, 2 months will just go out and start shopping. And everyone will try to catch up on all the tourism, all the restaurants, all the shopping that they missed. But I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think when see if anyone else is in here. Participants. No, no. What do you guys think? Do you think once the economy reopens, everyone will want to buy things? You can type it into the chat window if you have a thought. You can say it. What do you think will happen when the economy reopens? Well, I think demand. I don't might be a big bang of demand of everyone trying to get all that consumption going. But I think people will still be worried. They'll be worried about what could happen if they go to a restaurant. And so they're not going to be spending that money on entertainment. People might be worried about will their jobs be the same going forward, and they might hold back on expenditures because they're worried. So I don't think demand will come back again right away. What do you guys think when you guys are, do you think people are going to go spend their money right away? Will they wait? Will it be less than before, about the same? Any thoughts? Yeah, it'll probably be slow as people continue to take precautions. I think that'll just be natural. Like if you were watching what happened in Georgia, yes, some people opened and some people went to the hair salon and so on, but others didn't, and others didn't go because they just were, cautious about it. So we don't know. Like, that's the economists, they're supposed to predict what'll happen. We don't actually. This is a bit psychological. We don't know how people will react. If you're worried you're going to lose your business in the next few months, you're probably not going to make a big order. You're not going to buy a car. You're not going to, expand your business, or if you're worried, that if you go out to the mall, you could catch something, odds are you're going to stay at home. Go back to sharing my screen. So, one. So what do they mean on our supply and demand graph when there's a big bang? Well, it would look like this, right? That initially demand would shift to the right. It would go from this aggregate demand 0 to aggregate demand 1, and a big shift, and price level will go up, and the total GDP will go up if everything goes back to normal. But it's possible that supply is restricted, meaning if we can't ship a good because there was a labor shortage at the factory, if it got caught up with international transportation and wasn't able to cross the border, if the restaurant is allowing half as many customers, or the store is allowing half as many customers for social distancing, then an airplane, if there's only every other seat is occupied, then supply is still going to be slow. So the author went on to say how global supply chains may still be disrupted because countries will be returning at different paces, and cross-border trade will still be slow because there could be periodic health-related shutdowns. So that would look like the following. It turns out we don't have as much supply as we thought we would. The supply is still slow. You might see in 6 months' time, in 4 months' time, everything's a lot more expensive than you thought it would be. That might be why. If you're looking, hey, why is everything so much more expensive? Toronto's reopened. Well, it could be around the world that some of the goods have not arrived. There's difficulties crossing the borders. Other countries where you're getting your product might be shut down. And so that is, that's what you might see. You might see, there's about the same amount of economic activity, but the price of everything has just gone up. So instead of it being, at this old price level, it's now at a higher price level. And so what the bank is worried about, they don't want deflation. They don't want everyone's wages to go down, everyone, the prices to just plummet, everyone to panic, not enough money to be in the economy. So what they've done is they've injected $200 billion into our financial system. The government's injected a bunch of money as well. That's fiscal policy, but for a monetary policy, the banks injected $200 billion. How do they do that? Well, they bought $200 billion worth of debt. They bought bonds and other government debt. So the person who owned the Canadian government bonds, or the person who owned the debt, they paid them for it. Hey, we'll buy that debt off you. Here's $100 million. And now that $100 million has moved from the bank vault and it's out into the economy to be spent. And that's called quantitative easing. That's sort of injecting more money into the economy from the Bank of Canada, so that people feel like the businesses and consumers have more money to spend. So that was an article that I read over the weekend. I wanted to sort of go through it with you to sort of explain it. So hopefully you see a little bit about what's happening. And does anyone sort of have questions about any of the business news that they've seen? To the extent that I'm sometimes not sure. We've never had this happen, so we're not really sure what's gonna, how it'll resolve. Well, anyway, so I know you have a little less work from all your teachers. Might be interesting just to sort of read that business section, even if it's not normally in your habit, to see what's going on. Right. The rest of today's class is about risk management. And I was going to do this even if we didn't have this extreme issue happen, because there's other reasons that businesses might shut down. But the element is, when you're a business owner, you need to have some contingency plans. You need to have a plan for an emergency. If something unexpected happens, you don't want to react to it and then make your plan. You'd like to have a plan where you can calmly implement it. So why do we need um, emergency planning? Well, here's something that happened at a warehouse. This is a clip Mr. Hood gave me to show, the importance of having an emergency plan. Moment of. So, you can see there's this is a forklift company, just routine operations. And then, somehow the little collision between the two forklifts causes the whole warehouse, and this is a typical warehouse, the whole warehouse to crash down. And you'd think, well, something like that could never happen, but accidents, natural disasters, inclement weather, things like that can all happen. So what do they need there? Well, probably, they need some kind of an emergency plan, right? Like, it looks like a few people need to be rescued. Like, they should have, a designated person to call 911. They should have a first aid kit. They should be able to rescue anyone who's under all the packaging there. And maybe somebody can't work, so they need to have, um, insurance, so that person gets paid. In Ontario, it's workplace health and safety. It's done by the government. You need, insurance to replace all the shelves and all the forklifts that were damaged, and also business interruption insurance, which is something that you get in case your business has to, you know, um, stop for whatever reason. And say you weren't in that warehouse, but you were one of the companies that work with them. Well, you'd need, that warehouse is closed for a while, right? You need an alternate source of your parts, an alternate source of supplies in order to keep the production. So if you're just relying on one company, you might end up, in trouble if that were to happen. So, what other businesses or emergencies do you think could happen that would impact a business? Any thoughts? And you can say it or put it in the chat window. Other reasons that a business would be disrupted. Detrimental lawsuits. Or could you be more specific? Like, who's suing them, Simone? Is it a customer? Is it another business? Is it an employee? So yeah, you'd want to have, like, if another business, sued you for, stealing their idea, that would be one thing. Because if you lost, you'd have to find a new way to make their product. If customers were suing you because things were unsafe, you'd want to defend yourself, and then you might have to make, modifications to the product. So yeah, being sued, that's definitely a risk. So a lot of businesses will have a general counsel, or they'll have their, in-house counsel, or they'll have someone on retainer, so they don't go, once they get sued, and look for a law firm. They have a law firm that they regularly work with. Another company monopolizing the market. That would probably be more just regular business, right? Like, I'm talking about something that's totally weird and unexpected, like a sudden event, like, in the summer on CNN when they have the hurricane watch, and then they show you afterwards how the town in Florida has been destroyed, something like that. So these are things that, so another business competing with you is definitely something you should expect. But today is more about, like, for example, COVID-19, having the restaurant shut down. So if we were to look at the Chipotle restaurant down by the school, okay, so maybe they don't expect that COVID-19 will happen and everyone has to stay home. But, the building could have to close because of health reasons. Someone could, like, drive a car into the seating area and the seating area has to close, or it could flood. So they might want to have a plan in case the restaurant closes, but the kitchen remains open. Not that they're anticipating that this COVID-19 thing will happen and they need to still have takeout, but they might have one plan for, if there's a flood, if there's an accident and the restaurant seating area has to close. Go back to my screen. So, what could, who is in the, okay, well, I'm just still learning how to use Zoom correctly. There could be a fire, a natural disaster. Yeah, those are the types of things that could all happen. So, something like before the whole country shut down, even something like the coronavirus happening, if it was localized in Asia, was something that you'd need a plan for, because the more yellow it is, the more gold it is, the more products come from China. So even if Canada and the US were still healthy, they were still getting a fair amount of products from China. So if the plant, the consumer goods plant, had to shut down, the Canadian business would need an alternate source, just in case. I was reading how it was going to affect the prices of wedding dresses and prom dresses, because a lot of those were made in China. So a clothing store in Canada would need another place to get those prom dresses if there were difficulties in China. So, everything's sort of interconnected. So even though the initial issue might have been in China, China affects Russia, affects Australia, affects Brazil, Mexico, Canada, the US. So if there'd been an illness in one part of the world or a disaster in one part of the world, you need like a secondary supplier. There could be, illness, it could, someone could get sick and they might have to take time off for a while. It could disrupt the whole factory if everyone had to close. Some of the meat packing plants have closed due to COVID-19 because just having one sick person in the building requires that the whole place close down for safety. Well, then the grocery stores, now that the pork and the meat plants are closed, where are they going to get their goods from? There could be some shortages. It could lead to less things being available. So, this was initially, Starbucks closed and used reusable cups. Now what they've gone and done, I don't have video of it, is, if you go to the one at Holly and Eglinton, you have to order ahead and you can't enter the store. If you go to St. Germain and Avenue Road, they're open for online only, and they're serving one person at a time. What else could happen? Natural disaster. We don't, luckily in Canada, that doesn't happen as much. It seems like there's maybe been one big rainstorm a year in the summer that, forces businesses, areas get flooded, and there's been, some businesses get a little bit flooded. But in other parts of the world, like the southern US, it's more common. It can lead to business closures, employee evacuation, damage. You have to have emergency supplies on hand. Climate change can cause more pollution. If you're paying more for energy, maybe you need to, instead of buying it from the grid, maybe having solar energy panels might help reduce your energy costs. Climate change can lead to shortages, and the business could close if the area were the business is located, becomes too unstable. So, as an exercise, think of one of these. I think I missed one of my slides that I wanted to show you. Where did I? Okay, so how do you decide which ones to plan for and which ones to ignore? Because you can't plan for everything. Well, what you'd want to do is sort of think of what are the most serious things that could happen. So if the power went out at a business, that wouldn't be too serious, right? You'd have to, maybe you close for half an hour until it gets fixed. Medium, if there was a flood and the business had to close for 2 days, okay, that's a little more serious. This situation here where we all have to stay at home is incredibly serious. So you want to rank things from low severity to high severity. And usually companies do 3 different levels of not that serious, somewhat serious, and very serious. And then you want what's the likelihood of it happening? Is it something that'll happen once in 100 years? Well, that's probably low severity. Is it something that'll happen once every 10 years, once every 5 years? Medium severity. Is it something that's going to happen, once a year? For example, Amazon having one of their delivery drivers get into a car accident is something that's going to be of high probability, like it would happen to them all the time. They need to have a procedure for that. And then what you want to plan for is the ones that are the darkest red. So, if you were kind of to multiply, if this was 1, 2, 3, and this was low was 1, medium was 2, high was 3, and you multiplied them, so low likelihood, low severity, well, 1 times 1 would be 1. No need to plan for that. 1 times 3, you may or may not plan for it. If you're a small business, you might not plan for it. So you get to these here, high severity, medium likelihood, that would be, anything maybe that multiplies out to over 4, you make a plan for. Maybe you plan for these areas here, anything that's medium likelihood, medium severity, or high likelihood, medium severity. You can't plan anything, but you want to sort of organize it in a matrix and plan for the most severe things. Does that sort of make sense, that how businesses would organize things in terms of their severity and their likelihood to determine what needs a plan and what doesn't need a plan? So the first step of any emergency plan would be to list anything that could happen and try to estimate, is this something that's probable, very likely, unlikely, and then how bad is it? So this COVID-19 thing was it probably was unlikely that it would extend to everyone having to shut down across Canada and the US. But it was so severe that hopefully the governments and businesses already had a plan in place that they're just implementing. It's better to have the plan in place rather than, run around at the last minute, trying to do your best. So how can we practice it this week? So if we could pick in a group, if you wanted to conference with 2 or 3 other people and be a group of 4, if you wanted to do this on your own because you're working on your own, pick a major event like the Olympic Games, the Toronto Film Festival, a summer camp, a music tour, Canada's Wonderland. So one thing that happened last year at the NBA Summer League was they had an earthquake in Las Vegas as the games were happening. So they had to implement their emergency plan of evacuating the building, shutting things down for 2 days, inspecting the building, inspecting the court, and then reopening in a couple of days' time. So they might not have had an earthquake-specific plan, but they had a building evacuation natural disaster plan, which they implemented. So think of at least 6 emergencies that could disrupt the event and try to rate them according to that matrix. So according to which is likely and which is unlikely. So if we were doing a summer camp, what could be some things that a summer camp needs to plan for? Like, what are some extreme events that would affect the operation of a summer camp? I'll put one in there. So a fire, yeah. So the camp, is it, so how now you could also just, like, as a fire, you could throw in flood, like tornado, other natural disasters. And yeah, so it could be, you could have one for the entire campsite, the entire property is significantly damaged and they have to locate a backup site. Or it could be part of the camp is damaged and they, have to change things up to use the parts that are safe. A loss of employees, yeah, you would want to have a plan in case the camp director left, like who's next to take over, what to do if people are sick. But we're also focusing on things that are kind of extreme. So, I heard that already the camps in New York City, in New York State have been canceled, the thing being canceled, because of this. Inclement weather, a summer camp, what's the plan if it's rainy? What is the plan if someone is injured at the camp, and there's an accident and they need to get medical attention? What if, what if everyone, got food poisoning? What if there were mosquitoes? We've all been, I mentioned that one because we've all been to camps. So you'd want to think, what are some of the weird things that could happen, and try to organize them according to seriousness and likelihood. And then, so for example, if we're doing a day camp and we're talking about, okay, it rains all day. So what's the likelihood of that happening during the summer? Probably pretty high, but the severity of it is not so severe, it's not severe. So you might choose not to plan for it. Then, what's another thing that could happen? A fire. Simone had mentioned a fire. So how likely is a fire? Well, it's probably low likelihood, but it'd be pretty severe if it happened. So it might be one of these, might be low likelihood, high severity, and they'd want to plan for it. So, firstly, you pick your event. Maybe there's an event that isn't here that you'd like to work on. That's fine. Think of about 6 things that could happen and try to put them into this matrix if you can. And then, give each one a number. By that, I mean, say rainy day is number 1, fire is number 2, all the employees get sick is number 3. You can go for a random number generator online, it'll pick 1, 2, or 3 for you. And then whatever number you get, that's your situation. And you can create an emergency action plan just for that one situation. You don't have to do all 6 that you list, but you list them out, things that could happen, for the NBA Summer League, earthquake could have been one, building air conditioning not working, players getting injured, fans getting injured, heat wave, all kinds of things like that could have happened. You give them all a number, use the random number generator or roll a dice if you have one, and then that's the situation you're addressing. So if number 4 comes up, look on your list, see what you gave number 4 to, and then make an emergency action plan. So your steps would be gathering information. So when the NBA had that earthquake, firstly, they contacted the weather service. It's like, hey, what happened? Oh, there was this earthquake in Sacramento. Then they inspected the court and the scoreboard. to make sure the court, wasn't all messed up and the scoreboard wasn't going to fall down. Then they evacuated everyone from the building. They ensured health and safety. They secured the building. They made an announcement, like, okay, there was an earthquake. Things will be closed for 2 days. It's going to resume on Sunday. They gave out the refund. And then once things were safe to resume, they continued going on. So that would be kind of what your emergency action plan is. So, with that forklift incident that we watched at the start of this presentation, okay, ensuring health and safety. Does anyone need to be rescued? What happened? Like, was it, what caused this accident? How damaged is it salvageable? Maybe it's like clothing, it's something not fragile and you could still salvage it, or is it a total loss? You want to ensure everyone's safe. You want to gather information. You want to deal, okay, so it turns out it's all a loss. Well, we got to deal with our clients and let them know that we won't make this the shipment for this month. Go through all the steps you'd need to solve that emergency. And if the action plan has lots of good details, that would be full marks. If the action plan is missing several elements, like you forget to gather information and to ensure everyone's safety, then you won't get all the marks. But that's sort of this week's project to do by the end of the week. Pick an event. It's easier when it's an event because those have sort of set times of the year and set start and end dates. And pick an event by yourself or with a group. Just remember, if you're doing it as a group, make sure everyone puts their name on the document, and so that we know who it belongs to as teachers. And then do a little quick emergency plan. Does that make sense? Does anyone have questions? Okay, so if you noticed online, I had a poll. What do you want to cover next? So next class, I do want to cover the business cycle, but after that, we'll move on to whatever is covered, whatever you guys vote for in the poll. And also, if you need to improve your mark, do that international product launch assignment. And if anyone has any questions about that, I'll stick around in the chat room and answer your questions. So thanks a lot. Next class is Wednesday at 10 o'clock.